Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into some source material that's, well, it's pretty radical, highly personalized too. It comes from the Dmitrii Gorbatenko LogBook. Now this is a collection of essays, observations, basically documenting what the author calls a 10-year journey through a broken system. Frankly, it presents a major challenge to trust in modern global institutions.
Yeah, it's important to set the stage here. This logbook isn't really looking for small changes or reforms. Its core idea is pretty stark, that the institutions we rely on, especially the big global banking system, haven't just drifted. They've fundamentally changed. The author's argument is that they've shifted from being, pillars of the economy into tools for political and social control. It's quite an urgent perspective, seeing global governance as having systematically moved towards more centralized power.
Okay, so our mission today is to walk you through this critique, step by step. We'll focus on the three main arguments in the logbook. First, this idea that finance has been weaponized against people. Second, the growth of digital surveillance and controlling information. And finally, the solution the logbook proposes, a decentralized future, looking at things like Web3.
All right, let's dive into that first argument, finance. So, we start with an essay titled The Global Bank System, an Instrument of Oppression. I mean, the title says a lot. The author argues that recent global events, often called a health crisis in the official story, were actually leveraged, he says, as a kind of political and social revolution.
Right, and the logbook claims this wasn't really about public health, but about consolidating power by entities the author describes as having corrupt intentions.
And this period is seen as critical.
Exactly. The author sees it as the moment when technologies or regulations that might have seemed okay before were deliberately weaponized against individual liberties. It's really a claim about intent and about things speeding up. So the logbook makes this really radical claim then. The banking system isn't just a service anymore, not neutral. Dmitrii Gorbatenko claims it's basically acting like a tool wielded by what he actually calls a corrupt global mafia. The focus isn't just greed, is it? It's more about control, compliance.
Yeah, and we need to look at how this control supposedly works. The logbook goes beyond the usual critiques of banking failures. It gets into political coercion. It argues that systems like KYC, Know Your Customer, and AML, anti-money laundering.
Things designed to stop crime.
Supposedly. But the author claims they've been co-opted, used instead to enforce political agreement.
And this is where it gets really specific, with something the logbook calls the unseen chains. This seems to be where the theory hits, well, a very practical, alarming point. The claim is that banks now have the power to just freeze or even seize your money, and critically, without needing a court order.
Exactly. And the decisions aren't just based on financial issues, like not paying a loan or fraud. According to the logbook, these actions are increasingly based on other factors, non-financial ones, things like your nationality, maybe your political opinions, or even just a perceived lack of support for the ruling system.
Wow. I mean, if that's true, that completely changes how you think about the safety of your own money, doesn't it? It makes your savings account seem less like a secure asset and more like something conditional, dependent on someone else's approval.
The author calls it a scam on a global scale, and points out the, frankly, chilling idea that a lifetime of savings can be taken away with the click of a button. The key insight here is the shift from, say, traditional fines capital punishment to a kind of social punishment, economic exclusion just by freezing an account. It's presented as the ultimate way to keep people in line in a centralized system.
But hang on, is this a fair interpretation? Or is it mixing up necessary regulations with, actual oppression? What kind of evidence does the logbook offer to back up that claim about intent?
Well, the logbook does acknowledge that some oversight is needed. That's not the issue. The focus is squarely on the lack of judicial due process. The main complaint isn't the rules themselves, but the way financial institutions seem to hold all the cards, judging, enforcing everything, without a separate court involved. The author argues that even the titles of his other essays point to this. Things like The Inequality of the Modern Financial System, or A System of Inequality, How the Rich Get Richer.
Suggesting a structural problem.
Exactly, a structural flaw. And the power to seize funds without a judge signing off is presented as the key tool for keeping that inequality in place.
Okay, so if the argument is they control the money flow and can weaponize the rules, then presumably they also need to control the information, the narrative, to justify it all. Which brings us neatly to the logbook's second big critique, this idea of the digital cage.
Right. The author argues this centralized system isn't just held up by money. It's held up by controlling data and the stories people hear, social narratives. Gorbatenko talks about the huge increase in digital surveillance. He explicitly argues that cameras, monitoring systems, they were put in his view, not for public safety, but for social control.
That really sets the scene for what the source calls information warfare. The logbook describes it as this sophisticated process where official stories get presented as the absolute truth, regardless of the actual facts, and the ability to manipulate video, news feeds, digital evidence. That's highlighted as the main way to shape how people think and to justify measures the author sees as oppressive. It's like a systemic breakdown of truth, supported by centralized media platforms.
And what's interesting here is how the critique expands. It's not just government surveillance, it pulls in the role of commercial technology too. The author argues that this digital cage is built by both governments and powerful private companies running algorithms.
Absolutely. And the logbook lists examples showing just how widespread this perceived control system is. It seems to touch everything. You see these technical critiques like the algorithmic shadow, AI as a tool for fraud and suppression, or the rise of biometric surveillance, a global threat.
But the real punch in this section, I think, comes from the very specific, relatable examples. They show that this algorithmic control isn't just some abstract, high-level data thing. It affects everyday life, personal freedom.
Yeah, think about the claims aimed at services we all use. The logbook talks about how modern algorithms can oppress travelers, the case of Booking.com.
Right.
Or even this really specific one, how Tinder violates human rights, blocking introverts based on nationality.
Right. And these aren't just presented as random complaints. They're used as evidence for the broader claim about algorithmic oppression. The common theme is the lack of transparency, the lack of any way to appeal. When these huge centralized platforms, whether they handle your travel or your social life, make big decisions about you based on secret algorithms.
Secret scores, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you, the citizen, you have no right to appeal, no way to even find out why an automated decision was made against you.
So in this part, the logbook paints this picture where ordinary people face all these unprecedented restrictions, algorithmic, financial. Meanwhile, those running the centralized systems seem to operate without any constraints at all. That huge imbalance of power seems to be the engine driving the whole critique.
Yes. The logbook basically asserts that these algorithmic systems, maybe they started out for efficiency, but they become inherently unfair when there's no public oversight, no judicial review. When a booking site or a dating app can effectively lock you out based on hidden criteria, that's when, in the author's view, efficiency turns into systemic oppression.
Okay, so if the problem identified is this centralized, unchecked power, wielded with what the logbook calls corrupt intentions, then the solution has to involve rebuilding the whole foundation, right? Gorbatenko argues really forcefully that the current centralized system is just structurally not sustainable for humanity.
And the logbook does offer a clear path forward, technologically and morally. It's decentralization, giving individuals robust control. The solution, the author claims, lies specifically in adopting these non-custodial systems, things like blockchain and Web3.
Okay, let's drill down on how these technologies are supposed to fix the specific problems we just talked about. The source says decentralized systems offer a way to build a financial structure that isn't dependent on the whims of a few corrupt individuals. How does the tech actually stop a bank or anyone from seizing your funds?
Well, by its very design, decentralized finance often uses non-custodial technology. So if your assets, say your cryptocurrency, is held in your own private wallet, secured by your keys, then no central intermediary, no bank, no regulator, technically can't just freeze it or seize it, or reverse a transaction arbitrarily. That idea of immutability, the blockchain ledger being permanent, unchangeable, directly addresses that fear of having your lifetime of savings taken away with the click of a button.
I see. So decentralization gives back the self-sovereignty that the critique claims centralized banking took away. And the logbook also says these new systems can make all transactions transparent and, if needed, reversible, and let people do peer-to-peer exchanges, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers.
That transparency part is really key because it tackles the information warfare critique. If transactions are out there, recorded publicly on an open ledger, it gets rid of the secrecy that lets gatekeepers make these hidden, non-judicial decisions. The logbook argues this tech basically allows for creating self-sovereignty in both your financial and your digital life.
But the author doesn't just stop at suggesting tech fixes. There are explicit political demands too, right? For this transition to actually work. The logbook insists governments must be formally, legally stopped from accessing personal accounts directly, and no account should be frozen without a proper, legitimate court decision.
Yeah, and if we connect that to the bigger picture, the logbook frames this shift to decentralized finance as more than just a tech upgrade. It's presented as a moral imperative, a way to, and I'm quoting here, build a new system that serves all of humanity, not just the privileged few. In this vision, every transaction you make outside the old centralized system is described as a kind of vote for freedom.
That is a powerful way to wrap up such an intense critique. The logbook really traces this dramatic shift in perspective, from seeing banks as just services to viewing them as potential instruments of political control, enforced, the author claims, by opaque digital surveillance and these potentially oppressive algorithms.
Right. And the author's final call to action is essentially for people to take back their financial independence, to ban what he calls the corrupt regime, which does raise a really important question for us to think about, especially given the logbook's focus on that information warfare aspect.
So what does this all boil down to? The source material essentially says we face a choice between a digital cage and digital liberation. Now, if Web3 technologies promise to make data and transactions immutable, permanent, addressing those fears of centralized seizure from the logbook, does that kind of system truly dismantle the information warfare machine? Or does a technology built on permanent, unchangeable digital records risk just replacing human controllers who might be biased or corrupt with permanent, unchangeable digital verdicts, which could have their own problems? That's definitely something for you to explore further.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a pretty radical critique and a vision for a decentralized future.
We'll see you next time.